This episode of the Photography Online podcast is sponsored by ThinkTank. Keep listening for your chance to win a brand new backlight sprint camera bag.
Photography Online, the podcast.
Coming up in the next 60 minutes, we look at why there's trouble brewing in church aisles, how your phone camera can be ruined at a concert, and how AI can now help you with AI. Our big question this month asks if modern cameras make photography too easy. We then discuss what's the point of camera straps as we explain why you might not want to use them, before we take a look at some of the latest products on the market and ask, does the world really need a 50mm f1.2 lens, a memory card pouch, and a long quick release plate?
And now, please welcome your hosts for this episode of the Photography Online podcast. A man who is more Grizzly Adams than Ansel Adams. It's Marcus McAdam.
Hey, I just shaved as well.
And a man who is so complicated, he makes the Sony menu system look simple. It's James McCormick.
Hello, everybody.
And here to keep them both in check, a woman I'm told needs no introduction. It's Ruth Taylor.
Hey everybody, it is Ruth. Welcome to our April podcast. I'm the host of the show, Photography Online, and of course the podcast here as well, attempting as ever to keep some sort of order between Marcus and James. They caused a little bit of a kerfuffle last time they were together. Hopefully we're not going to overly offend people this month, but if we do, it keeps things interesting. Anyway, welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you very much.
Good to be here.
As always, James, just as we were starting, you were showing us your tiny little mug that said what?
Oh.
What was it?
It says, no, I need to get this correct. Look out, it's James. Hot stuff coming through.
We're very grateful this is the podcast and not PO Live or anything else that is visual. But anyway, James has got his little cup of something to keep him going throughout the show. Everybody, very, very welcome. It's been great to have comments and stuff from you guys over the last few weeks, enjoying the podcast as far as we're aware. We've got a few comments that we're going to come to a little bit later on in the show, but we're going to start right off with it, I think, by having a look at what's been happening in the news, photography related stories. We've got a few of these today. First up, Marcus, what have you found?
Well, the first story that I came across was something that's appeared in the news a couple of times about a confrontation between wedding photographers and vicars, but I suppose you could expand that to celebrants, and who else would that be, James?
Registrars, I guess. So celebrants, registrars and vicars, although the story is typical to the BBC, based around vicars.
Yes, and obviously we're talking about weddings in churches here. Now, having only been married once and not in a church, I'm probably not the best person to give my opinion on this.
Which you're asking me, because I've been married in a flipping great abbey, but only the once.
Well, several times, I believe.
Only the once, thank you. I don't know. It's a funny one, really. You can actually see the story. It's all over the BBC website and stuff, so feel free to go and find it. I think if you just Google wedding photographers and aggressive behaviour on behalf of vicars, you'll find it. But that is, as we've said, harsh, because it's not just vicars. I'm sure it expands to out-of-church weddings as well. And in the end, I'm guessing that it's come from both sides of the camera, if you like, so from the vicar's side and photographer's side, because photographers can be a bit pushy and a bit annoying, there's no doubt, at weddings. So it's probably one of those social situations, really, where both sides of the camera need to behave themselves. But also the other thing that strikes me is the expectations that have probably changed in recent years from the brides and what they want in terms of their pictures.
So, Marcus, what is the story? Just explain it to us. What's the problem here?
So the problem is that photographers are trying to do probably stupid things in order to get the photos that they want. So the examples that I've read in the article are clambering over chairs during the ceremony and making all sorts of noises, lying on the floor of the aisle to try and get a worm's eye view looking up, and even standing between the vicar and the couple, or between the couple themselves.
Wow.
So you can kind of, so that's obviously not appropriate behaviour on behalf of the photographer, and there's no excuse for that. But what's happening is that these probably a small minority of people, and they're probably not professional in terms of they're not professional wedding photographers. They're probably, someone who's been asked to do it as a favour because they happen to have a camera. We've all been there. And they've come in, they don't know the etiquette, and they've just basically come in with a single-minded approach of, I need to get these shots and put everything else, to one side. So naturally, Vicars and, whoever the registrars are, they've taken an issue with this. And so we've got this bit of a standoff going on at the moment between, wedding photographers and vicars in churches. But I think it just needs a bit of generally good behaviour and understanding on both sides. But there's been examples of vicars that have been unreasonable as well. So there was one example, and this has come from the couple who were having the wedding. Their photographer was told that he was only, it could be a she, they were only allowed to take one photo during the ceremony. It had to be from the back of the church. And once that one photo had been taken, they were asked to leave. So again, it's unreasonable. But I think my personal opinion on this is that if a couple are paying to get married in a church, it's their day and they should call the shots.
Yeah, absolutely. I was interested at the story. You read the story and you assume it's going to be rude photographers, inconsiderate photographers, but actually the angle in the story was the vicars being rude and aggressive. But obviously it comes from the same thing. But how do you get that balance? Is it a case of meeting in advance and just saying, this is what the expectations are, you got to adhere to it? What are you planning?
I just think that if it's me and I'm paying for the event and I'm the one who's getting married, I should be in a position where I say, listen, I want the photographer to have the freedom to go wherever they want because the photos are really important to me. Or actually, the ceremony is more important to me and I don't want the photographer, upsetting that. So, the priority is on you, the vicar, and not on the photographer, and make that clear to everybody.
It's the making it clear part, isn't it? Communication, here's what the expectations are, and then, people can deal with it. But that was an interesting story, actually, to see the vicars on the wrong side of it. Although, slightly understandably. Another story that we've come across in the last couple of weeks, James, to do with camera centres getting destroyed. What's this all about?
Well, it's a story that's it's a bit of a strange one, because when I first read it, it says that camera sensors are being destroyed by lasers, and I assumed that was the sort of laser pointery pen things that people shine at, I don't know, tennis players or cricketers or people on sports fields, but it's not at all. It was actually the lighting rigs that are used in clubs, the sort of thing that Marcus used to hang out in when he was in his younger days. But apparently these new lasers, if you catch it at a certain angle, it will literally fry your sensor. What I mean by fry is destroy it beyond recognition. So, and it's talking about both pro cameras and iPhones as well. So in essence, mirrored and mirrorless cameras. So it's hard to know where to go with this story, other than I certainly won't be at a gig where these lasers are in operation. So I've got nothing to worry about with my camera. Marcus might well be at a Coldplay concert. But yeah, I don't know, be careful where you point your camera, I suppose.
Changing the subject slightly, I was looking at a video which is associated with this news story. And it's a video from a phone at the back of towards the back of a live music event. So you've got a band on stage, and it's someone holding their phone up, videoing it. And there's lasers that are shining all over the place. And every time a laser hits the camera, you can physically see the damage that's being done to the sensor. So it's quite interesting to see how the damage happens. However, what was more worrying for me was that in front of this person who's doing the videoing, who's holding their phone up, there's probably 400 or 500 other people between them and the stage. And out of those 400 or 500 people, at least 300 of them have also got their phone held up above their head, and they're just looking at their phone. And you think, what's the world come to when people pay to go to a live music event and they just stand there with their hand in the air and look at their phone? Maybe these people have got like some kind of like short-sighted problem where, they can't see a long distance away. They can only see at a close distance. They have to hold their phone up and then look at their phone because they can't see the band on stage. I'm assuming that must be the case.
We definitely need to introduce a feature just called What Has the World Come To? And it can just be, rants. It weren't like this in my day and all the rest of it. I mean,
well, in my day, people looked at nice pictures of concerts. That was, you'd go, you'd experience it, and then you'd buy a nice, probably slightly unsharp image, if it was taken by me, of said performer.
He's just lamenting a lost income stream there, James.
Yeah, it's very true.
But anyway, Sony, who make all the sensors for Apple products, have issued a warning stating that lasers can damage the sensors. So this isn't something that's just happened to one or two people. It's fairly common, and if you do have, I don't know if the same. Do we know if the same issue happens on non-Apple products? So if you've got a Samsung phone or a Google Pixel,
yeah, it does, because I looked into it, and it has happened on other cameras. But normally the reason is other cameras are not allowed in gigs because they're banned, because artists ban them.
So the thing that we need to do then is when we do Photography Online, the live show, which is a stage show, to stop people filming it on their phones, we just need to have a load of lasers, and then that's it, job done.
Did you say the stage show? Is there plans afoot that I'm unaware of?
Oh, what, we're going on tour? We're on tour.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I just think we can take it to the net. We've got the YouTube show, we've got the magazine, we've got the podcast. So the next thing to do is stadiums.
Yeah. Harry in a tutu on stage. Perfect. What more could people want?
That might be in aid of a Kickstarter campaign, I think, for something like that, which we'll come on to a little bit later on in the show. But another news story, and I was just saying before, I'm getting extraordinarily sick of these two letters when it comes to photography. But we do have a couple of stories around AI. Marcus, this is actually slightly more video. Well, it's completely video sided as opposed to photography. But it does link in. Tell us what this story is.
If you're already fed up with AI, Ruth, then buckle in, because it's not going anywhere. So I think, sadly, it's going to be here for a while. But one story that jumped out to me recently was that YouTube they have launched a new product, and it's called Jump Ahead. It's currently only available to YouTube Premium users in the US. But basically, it's an AI-driven program that when you press the forward button on a video, it jumps to what the AI thinks is the most interesting part of the video.
So does it know when you're on screen then? Or when you're not, more importantly?
Obviously, for our Photography Online, when you press the go to the best part, it would just play the entire video. So it kind of works in our favour, really. But it's just, what's the world coming to when...
There's that phrase again. This is going to be a thing.
But what is the world coming to when, you have to have artificial intelligence to tell you what the best part of a video is? Surely the best part of a video would be different for different people. And all AI can do is say what's the most popular. Basically, we're doomed. We got to stop thinking for ourselves. Just give up, turn your brain off, and turn AI on. There we go, done.
Well, there are varying phrases you don't like, Ruth, that are beginning to become repeats. Well, AI and me saying I'm bored is one of those, because it's just boring.
You're not wrong. But anyway, sticking with the boring theme, much as I don't want to, but this has, of course, been extremely prevalent in the media over the last few weeks. James, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I suspect everyone listening does. The Kate Middleton sort of furore, the storm over a mildly manipulated image, which, to be honest, in summary, she shouldn't really have done what she did, or William, or whoever it was. But, there are extenuating circumstances, and I hope people have learnt their lessons about being too judgy about, jumping to too many conclusions too quickly. But I think both sides could probably learn something from this. And, the royals themselves have a duty, which I know you can tell they're only too aware of, to keep things straight, as it were. But the image itself was, whether it's manipulated or not, there's not a lot of difference between, swapping one person for another or just redoing the picture. And given the situations that they found themselves in recent times, I think we should all give them a bit of a break and wish them well, and wish her well going forward, really. There's not much more to be said on it, really, other than calm down the rest of the world. My take on it now, having, the dust settled, is that I'm glad it happened, because what it's done is it's highlighted the whole issue of the authenticity of photography, certainly in the press, and it's brought it to the attention of people who maybe just weren't aware of how many photos aren't authentic anymore, because to say it's a majority would be underestimating it vastly. I would say 90% of the photos that we see are not genuine anymore. And people just don't realise that. And this has helped
raise that issue, I think. So I'm glad it happened, because it was such a high profile thing that no one's been able to escape it in one sense or another.
Well, okay, so from mildly edited pictures to something on the other extreme, Marcus, another AI story regarding, I don't even know, do you know what? Explain it. What's this story?
For anybody who's interested in doing AI-generated photos, apparently, and I say apparently because I've never done it and I never will, the success of the photo is all down to the prompt. So if you're good at prompting the AI generator into what you want, it will come up with a very reasonable and satisfying result. If you're not good at that, then you're probably going to get a load of nonsense. So someone's come up with a problem-solving piece of software here, and it's an AI prompt engineering platform where you type in what you want into this platform and it generates an AI prompt which will get you to the right result. So if you're having problems with your AI can help.
So a prompt for a prompt.
Yes. So that if I said, I want a photo of James McCormick in a loincloth in a desert.
Riding a hippo.
In a desert. Then if I just put that into an AI image creator, it probably isn't going to come up with something that I have in my mind. So instead I put it into an AI prompt engineering program, and that then expands it into a prompt which the AI will then go, right, okay, now I know what this guy wants.
I hope the microphone picked up there.
Was that the hippo?
Yes, thank you. No, that was a bored hippo again.
It's getting into character.
but what it is AI is engineered to help the more, how can I diplomatically put this, the stupid people in society get a leg up on the people that are more capable, because AI doesn't really help people who have already got the skills. AI only helps the stupid people.
And it does depend if it's photography you're trying to do, or if it's an art piece, because AI does do what it does, like painting style things that are never supposed to be a photograph. So I've seen people prompt things for that, and they've used it as maybe promotion for an event, and that's fine. It doesn't look like a photograph. We know it's not a photograph. This is a huge big can of worms that we're not going to go into.
Shut that can, Ruth. Shut that can down.
We're going to move on.
Put the lid on.
We're going to put the lid back on that can. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, big thank you to ThinkTank, who are sponsoring this podcast. They have also given us something to give away. We are running a competition, our first competition on the podcast. You can't see Marcus, obviously,
thankfully,
but he is holding up a bag. This is the podcast, Marcus. It's not the...
Yeah, but look at that. Look at that. Look at that. It's got all that, and look at that thing there, and look, that goes over like that, and then you can do that round and listen.
What are the zips? Are they good quality zips? Oh. That would be very disturbing if we were sharing a room and I heard that noise. But anyway.
So Marcus, tell us a bit more about the bag.
Okay, well, this is new to the market. It's been out in the US for a couple of months. It's new this month in the UK. Like you say, it's a very small and compact bag, but it will take a 150 to 600 millimeter lens attached to a body in there. So don't think that just because it's a small bag, it's not going to take a big lens. If you don't have a long lens on, then it will take a couple of bodies and 3 or 4 lenses. So there's plenty of room in there. But like you say, it's a small bag. So if you want to go hiking or any kind of outdoor activities or sports things, if you're going to go kayaking or biking, anything like that, this is the ideal pack to take all your gear with you, really.
Fabulous quality. So we're giving it away. We have put a link in the show notes. So whatever platform you're listening on, look for the show notes. There's a link in there to a form where you can give us your details, and we will be announcing the winner on our next show. So head on there, head into the show notes. There's other links in there too for some of the stuff we've been discussing if you're interested in that. But big thank you to ThinkTank for that. We are going to move on to the next part of the show, which is
the big question. It's a question, and it's big.
Yes, it is. Big question this month. Do modern cameras make photography too easy? Now, I posted this up on our socials a few days ago just to get some feedback from you guys, and there was a lot of it. I'm going to just read a couple of the comments from Facebook. Gemma, I like what Gemma said. This is from Gemma Louise Barnes on Facebook. She said, not necessarily. Composition and the feeling the images creates for the viewer makes a better photo, in my opinion. Camera features help make something technically better, but you still want a balanced aesthetically pleasing and meaningful image. I would know. I have fancy features and it doesn't make my images any better. And David Taylor from Facebook as well said, if you're comparing the digital era to film shooting, then yes, it probably is, but no amount of IBIS, etc. is going to teach you composition, location scouting, and finding the enthusiasm for getting up at silly o'clock to go to a particular location. That's from Facebook. Couple more from Insta. This is from Jennifer Day. She said, I think modern cameras make photography more accessible to more people and let more people be artistic without having to comprehend the technical side of everything. That being said, people who are photographers for a living still need the technical skills to take photos that clients expect, and the newest functions can enhance their workflow. The camera still doesn't decide on composition, so that's still up to the photographer's eye. And an interesting final one from Insta. This is from Raphael. He says, the question screams gatekeeping. Come on. So, guys, what's your take on our big question?
So the question, do modern cameras make photography too easy? Well, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I think, in essence, in some areas, they certainly make photography. So if you want a bird in flight, for example, that would have been extremely difficult back in the days of film with a manual focused 500mm lens. That took real skill. Now, just about anybody could point. Sigma have got a wonderful new 500mm lens out. You could bolt that onto a modern mirrorless camera, eye detection on, and it will be sharp. So my question is that fair, unfair? Is that easy, not easy? I just think it changes what photography is all about. But in the end, a good photographer takes a good photograph, and it's a bit like, the cream rises to the top, and that will still, that will continue to happen. And the other thing that I think is slightly missing the point here is that more people take pictures now than they did in the old days as well. And that's because not only is photography and the technology making things a little easier, it's more accessible. So everyone's phone has a camera in it, for example. And, a camera will deliver just about all the processing, all the focusing, everything that's needed to get a good picture straight out the barrel. Whereas, if you've got a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, then it takes a little bit more awareness and skill. But my overall take on it from using cameras every single day is that it speeds up my workflow, which I think one of the correspondents alluded to, which is a good thing. So I'm glad about that. And I use probably, I would say, without exaggeration, I'm sure Marcus will come in and agree with this in a second, 1% of the technology that's built into my camera. Now, that's because I don't use autofocus particularly, or I don't use the advanced autofocus functions particularly, and that would certainly add to it if I was photographing a lot more moving subjects. But I would say 1% of all those menus and all that technology and IBIS that somebody mentioned and all of that, 1%, that's it. So in essence, there is no real difference other than it speeds up my workflow, and that is valuable. Okay,
so Marcus, what actually prompted this question initially?
Okay, so a couple of shows ago, you would have seen James and Harry at Chester Zoo taking various photos, and we actually filmed another feature there, which hasn't gone out yet. And Harry was in an aviary, basically, and he was photographing a bird using live view, so he wasn't looking through the viewfinder. James was standing behind him, so I'm filming Harry, James is standing behind Harry, and Harry's actually taking the photo of the bird. So James is looking over Harry's shoulder and can see the screen, and he's noticing that the camera is focusing on the eye automatically. Harry hasn't had any input into that whatsoever. As the bird's moving around, or as Harry's changing the composition, the camera is keeping focus on the bird's eye. It's doing auto exposure. It's basically doing everything other than holding the camera. And afterwards, James just came over to me and said, I can't believe how easy that was, because the technology has just taken all the skill out of it. And that's what's prompted the question here.
So is that a problem where people are not that interested in the technical side? They want to, I don't
think it's a problem, but I just think that, there was a time when a photographer had to have a set of skills, and those set of skills would have been understanding the exposure triangle, to know that if you open up your aperture, you need to compensate by one of the other two sides of the triangle. advanced photographers would have known, who were using flash photography or, artificial lights, would have had to know about the inverse square law. There's all these little nuggets of information that all photographers would have had to know, but now that's no longer necessary. So it goes back to the point that we were making earlier on in the show, where all of this technology is really aiding the people who aren't willing to put in the graft and learn the skills. It fast tracks them to being able to take technically competent photos. Now, in agreement with all the comments that you read out, what it doesn't do is it doesn't aid you with seeing the photo in the first place or with composition, because they're creative inputs rather than the technical inputs. But in terms of exposure and focus, it's got to the point now where if you take a photo that's not in focus and it's not exposed well, then you really are an idiot, because the camera can just do it all for you.
So on behalf of idiots around the world, is it not a little bit harsh saying that people who aren't willing to put in the graft, because, what's wrong with not being completely technically minded and relying on the fact that your camera can do these things, therefore I don't need to necessarily learn them? They wouldn't know that there's anything necessarily wrong with that. They're just thinking, right, that camera does this part, I'm interested in this part, and I'm doing this part, and together we're making a good image. What's the issue there?
There's no issue whatsoever. All I'm doing is I'm making an observation on how it used to be and how it is now. So you could argue both ways. You could argue that it's a positive thing because it opens up a lot of opportunity for people who weren't interested in learning the exposure triangle or the inverse square law. But that's that kind of stuff. If you understand that, it makes photography a lot more rewarding and enjoyable.
Yeah, I don't deny that, but I've seen many people in our workshops, sorry James, I know you want to speak, who we know and we can see they've got a really good creative eye, but they struggle with the technical side. And I just want to put it out there that it's not necessarily they're not willing to learn, or they're not, they're stupider than other people. That's not the case. It's just people's brains are wired differently, and if something can help them on one side, I understand what you're saying. It's good to have that knowledge, but I would say let's not just think people are stupid or unwilling just because they don't.
No, okay, I'm using that term loosely, but there's two sides of photography. There's the creative side and there's the technical side. Some people get both, which is great. Some people get neither, and some people have one and not the other. Now, if somebody, a customer or a student, comes to me and they understand the technical side of photography, but they don't understand the creative side of photography, that's a much more difficult issue to address for me than if it's the other way around. If they come with the creative side and they can see the photo and they compose it well, but they struggle with the technical side, I can deal with that, because that's not a problem. I can take them aside and go, right, this is how it works, and you just explain it in layman's terms. And all these things that might sound like the exposure triangle, that sounds really complicated. It's not complicated at all if it's explained properly and you can go through it in a practical sense. So what this technology is doing is it's not necessarily dealing with the more difficult problem. It's dealing with the easier of the two problems anyway. I just think that a lot of people are missing out on learning the fundamentals by relying on technology.
Okay, James? Well,
there's two or three things that have come to mind during what you've both been saying there. I started a very long time ago in the late 80s with a opera and classical music photography. Now, the relevance to that is that this is before the times of autofocus for a start. And I'm talking about taking pictures of opera singers on stage, basically, using film and manual focus lenses. Now, this guy, his name is Clive Barder, feel free to go Google him. He was a genius at what he did, and he taught me basically the genius that I now am. No, he it's not what I meant at all, but he taught me the value of concentrating on focus. For example, manually focusing 300-400 millimeter lenses, a tiny little opera singer, or in often many cases a ginormous great opera singer, but a long way away on a stage, and concentrating on light and understanding the difference, how when a light falls from a particular degree or a particular angle, getting critical focus. But at the same time, what he was doing there was he was combining the skills of that focus, of that concentration, into the creative side of it. So picking out the right moment when she lifts her chin to belt out a particular aria or whatever, to hit that note at the right time with the right light. But he was using the focus very much, the manual focus, to tune. So he would almost time the focusing to the music, to pressing the button. That is a real skill. And that these days, you could, without using the word, likely the idiot behind the camera, we don't really mean it, it's just a simple term. But most people could now press the button and do that. And alongside him was an idiot, and that was me, standing with a spot meter telling him what the exposure was. And he would be manually dialing in that exposure. Now that's a team effort to create a picture, and it's using the manual skills of a photographer to create something that's really very special. And he was highly skilled at doing it. There's another, I remember speaking, when Marcus was talking about me standing behind Harry, I was almost expressing dismay at how easily Harry was managing to take pictures of tiny little birds pin sharp without any real skill. Not that that's Harry's problem at all. I mean, I would have been looking through the viewfinder and Harry was just nice and relaxed looking at the LCD on the back, literally with a fag and a beer on the go. They're metaphorical. But I remember speaking to a horse racing photographer who was a very close friend of mine and this was again at the time when autofocus lenses were just coming in, and he switched from Nikon manual to Canon autofocus because at that time they were slightly better. And he said, this is the end of my career. And I said, why? Because he said, I'm one of the only people that can photograph a horse coming down the finishing straight at the Grand National, going over Beecher's Brook or whatever it is. And he was brilliant at predictive focusing, manually predictive focusing. And he could track focus manually. And he said, now anyone can do it. Now, that wasn't the end of his career at all. He went on, and as far as I'm aware, I haven't actually spoken to him. I should give him a call. We should get him on the show, in fact. But I'm sure he's still shooting horse racing. But certainly for the 10, 15 years after that, he went on to take some of the most incredible pictures, some of the most iconic pictures you would have ever seen of horse racing using autofocus. So his skill as a photographer transcended what he thought was his skill as a manual operator. Actually, he was a brilliant photographer, not just a brilliant focuser. So in essence, the cream, as I said earlier, the cream will rise to the top, and being able to combine the technical skills to your creative skills for those that don't do it for a living, those that are doing it for fun, it's finding a natural balance for you and finding how far down the rabbit warren you want to go technically. For instance, I have absolutely zero interest in focus stacking or front to back sharpness. I have no interest in that because I don't enter competitions where that's important. I take pictures for clients where the overall feel of the image is important. So I found hopefully the balance between where I'm comfortable technically and where it allows me to be as creative as possible. And that balance is something that each photographer needs to find. So the big question of, do modern cameras make photography too easy? It's a slightly moot point. A modern camera was a modern camera back in 1988 when I first started taking pictures, going back to the days of Ansel Adams. That was a modern camera when it was first in his hand. So there will always be technology that makes it easy. It's what you make of it as an individual.
There's one analogy here which I wanted to draw. I've got a number of cars, not because I'm wealthy, but because we run a fleet of vehicles, and some of them are older than others. Now, the newest car, which is 18 months old, it's got auto everything. So, it changes gear for you. The full beam is auto. So when you're driving at night, when it detects that there's no cars on the road, it will put the full beam on, and then it sees a car coming and it dips it for you. So you just choose to ignore that and let the technology do it.
I love the way Marcus is talking about this as if it's new technology. This technology, just to remind you, Marcus, auto dipping headlights and automatic transmission have been around for about 25 years.
But I'm just giving you an example of the different cars that I drive, okay? So this latest car, it will self-park for you. I've never used the function because I'm perfectly capable of parking the car myself. But apparently, if you pull up next to a parking place and press the button, it will guide you perfectly into the parking place. Now, I've got no need to use that, and I don't want to use it, so I've never used that. It's got the sat nav and everything. So when I drive this car for a while and kind of get my brain into using that car, and then I go to one of my other cars which doesn't have auto dipping headlights, it's a manual car, it doesn't have it won't park itself. It makes me a bad driver because I'm driving along and all of a sudden I'm blinding people with my headlights. I'm forgetting to change gears. So the car's kind of like, on the verge of stalling and people behind me are getting, frustrated. And after 10 minutes or 15 minutes in the car, then I'm back to where I would have been. But what I'm saying is if I, as a non-driver, learn to drive in a modern car which does everything for me, then that surely makes me a bad driver when put in any other car. And it's the same with a camera. If you learn photography on a camera which will do everything for you, if you give that person another camera, all of a sudden they're back to square one again.
So the irony there is that it's actually down to you to continue to be a good driver, and it's down to photography. Just because you've got all this technology built into your car or camera, it's up to you to make the effort to actually still think outside the technology box, as it were, to make the most of it. Because a great camera is all, Lewis Hamilton's still going to be the best racing driver in the world, even though he's not in the best car at the moment and he finishes second, third, fourth and fifth because Verstappen constantly wins. But that's because, Hamilton's still the best driver.
Well, there'd be people who would disagree with that. But going back to this car, okay, every time you stop and you take the key out of the ignition, a little warning message comes up on the console and it says, check rear seats for occupants. So I've gone through the menu of the car. You cannot take this message off. You cannot disable it. So every time I get out the car, it thinks I'm so stupid that I might have left somebody in the back seats and I might go away and lock the car and lock them in the car. So it's telling me, before you get out of the car, please just check in the back to make sure that you've got nobody sitting behind you. I mean, how stupid are we that we have to be told to check the rear seats for occupants before we get out of a car? It's unbelievable. So how long is it going to be? How long is it going to be before a camera is sending you a message on the back saying, please remove the lens cap before taking the photo?
That's not a bad idea.
I'm surprised it doesn't say that, actually. That's a really good idea.
There'll be a Kickstarter campaign for that one in the next few days. Anyway, that was our big question for this month. If you've got a take on it, our posts are still up on social media, Facebook, Instagram. Have a wee look for Photography Online. Feel free to have your say. Next month's big question, if you're joining us, I'll be asking fine art photography. What is it? And I'm sure that's going to have a lot of comments. I've got a few in my own head, but we'll keep that for next month. Speaking of comments, big thank you, as I said at the beginning, to everyone that has tuned in to the podcast over the last couple of months. I had a few comments, some nice stuff. Old Seaman saying, totally fab podcast, as I do so much driving. It helps me keep up with you guys. Thanks for doing this. Adam Pakenham Photography said, just like the YouTube show, this podcast is really well put together. Good information. The presenters really work well together. I've been a fan of the Photography Online show since the beginning, and this podcast adds welcome content. So nice to have some nice feedback.
£20 is on its way to you there.
Absolutely. A tenner for each of you, Adam and Old Seaman. YouTube, wherever we look at the YouTube comments, obviously lots of people commenting down there on the main show. Happy Mystic 9800. She says, my favourite presenter delivered another entertaining show while the protagonists out in the field did the same with their stunning images. So thank you to Happy Mystic.
So who was her favourite presenter?
She didn't say. So that's open to interpretation, but certainly the protagonists are obvious enough. Biddy Bix 9154 says, James, your Miss Foxy dog can come and live with me any old time she likes.
Well, she comes with me though. So what was the lady's name? Was it a lady?
She comes with James.
Well, I'll take my chances. We're on our way.
Anyway, she says she's beautiful and a great model as well. Roger Lush 3344. First shot of Hadrian's Wall, Marcus. If it had been digital, you could have blended them together and achieved near perfection. Do we want to comment on that?
No, let's just move on quickly.
All right, well, Billy Tetlow says, much more enjoyable than the first episode, less amateur dramatics and more photography. Excellent. Loved the guy who did the light painting. He was photography's answer to Fred Dibnah.
Who's a hero.
Very knowledgeable, very laid back, with a dry sense of humour. That is Stephen, who was excellent.
So go on, James, explain who Fred Dibnah is.
Who Fred Dibnah is. There's one for the kids listening. Well, first of all, the laid-back sense of humour of, what was the chap's name, did the light painting for us?
Stephen.
Wasn't he just magnificent? What a section that was. And if you haven't seen it, go find it. simply one of the best little segments you've ever done on the show. So what an amazing guy. What a talent as well. And somebody who truly loves his art. And somebody who knows how to combine, by the way, the use of modern technology and being creative as well. So, but anyway. But Fred Dibner, more importantly, what would Fred Dibner have made of AI? Now, there's a question to pose.
Well, who was he?
For those who don't know, Fred Dibner was a steeplejack, which is basically somebody who knocks down chimneys, old industrial, Victorian, industrial area chimneys that were all over the country, the UK, back in, I suppose, the 70s and 80s. I used to see him on TV in the 80s, I think, late 70s, early 80s. There used to be documentaries about him, and he would literally knock down a chimney, either from the top by sitting on it with no health and safety. He didn't know what a hard hat was. He'd have a fag on the go, no high-vis, not even a safety rope. He'd just climb up there and knock a chimney down brick by brick. Or he would knock a hole in the bottom of one of these enormous sort of 200-foot chimneys, prop it up with a bit of wood, bit of, some timber girders, and then just set fire to them. And when they burn away, the whole thing would fall down. He was a total legend, and his surname is Dibner, which is spelled Dibnah. Go Google him, because he's a living, well, dead legend.
Well, take the compliment out of that, Stephen. Final comment of the month comes from Jonathan Jones 4566, and I'm not entirely sure what this is in response to. He says, if your crew hates each other so much, you should stop making the show. Eventually words will turn to actions. I
think he's probably just pointing towards the fact that we're always talking each other down in terms of each other's photography. So we're always...
Well, we would talk each other up if there was something to... But there's nothing to do. So, I mean...
Yeah, I would say, Jonathan, just chill out a bit and don't take things so literally.
All right, well, those are some of the comments. Or do. Yeah, there's some of the comments about the podcast and the show, and it's always great to hear from you guys, no matter what it is you're thinking. We are going to move on with our next feature, which is...
What is the point?
What's the point?
Right, question this month. What is the point? We are talking camera straps. Now, I remember when I first started working with these guys, Marcus had my camera, and the first thing he did was take the camera strap off. This was 5 years ago. It's never been put back on. I don't actually want to put it back on, but what's prompted this particular feature? Marcus, I'm going to assume. Let's go to you.
Well, what's prompted this to be raised here is that in the last, let's say, year, I've seen 3 people drop their cameras purely because they've had a camera strap on it. I remember once recently we were photographing Ellendon Castle, and we just got out of the car, and there was this almighty crash, and you know that kind of sound of technology hitting tarmac.
I do. I know it well.
It's a horrible sound. And turned around, and there was a Canon R5 with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens just in pieces on the floor, and that was just purely because it had a strap on it, and the person thought that the strap was round their wrist, and it wasn't. They let go of the camera, and then bang, it's just on the floor. So I'm not saying that camera straps are always redundant. There are times when they might come in handy, but majority of the time it's better and safer to not use a camera strap. So if you're working on a tripod in the wind, definitely take your camera strap off, because it's not going to do anything other than flap around and cause vibrations. If you're walking around with your camera, then have it in your hand, because that's where it's most useful, rather than over your shoulder or around your neck, bobbing around all over the place. That's another thing. People put their camera straps round their neck so their camera's in front of them, and then they kind of start climbing over fences and gates and rocks and what have you, and the cameras are swinging around, smashing into the rocks, and you just think, what is wrong with you people? Just put your camera in your bag and take the strap off, because if you have a strap on it, that's what it does. It promotes you not having to put it back in your bag. James, you're poised.
I'm poised, you're right. I think the default position is carry a camera strap, but keep it in your bag and apply it to your camera when needed, rather than the other way around. So there are a lot of people, as Marcus has said, that as soon as you get your camera, you put your camera strap on and it stays on. No, don't do that. As soon as you get your camera, leave it off. And I spoke earlier in the podcast about the guy that originally taught me a long, long time ago. He refused to have camera straps on any of his cameras as well. There's a whole load of Nikons in a huge camera bag. None of them had straps on, mainly for the reason that you put them on the table or put them down, and they get caught on something. Someone's thumb gets caught in them or whatever, and they get dragged off a table and hit the ground. So the default position for me is absolutely no camera strap, but I do carry one in my bag because sometimes if I have to shoot stuff from, I don't know, the top of a crane or whatever, then you need hands free to be able to climb the crane. But even then, it realistically should be putting your camera in your bag rather than having it swinging around your neck.
So I've got a big camera, and like I said, I take my camera strap off because it gets in the way. The camera's easy to hold with one hand, but I've also got a small camera, which I always keep a small strap on, and I wrap it around my wrist, and because it's quite a small, slippery camera, it gives me that confidence that it's not going anywhere. I keep it on, it's not a problem.
Well, you also insisted on having a camera on a very expensive Leica in Venice, didn't you? Which was in the last episode of Photography Online, I believe, because you were paranoid about dropping it into a canal.
Well, I mean, that's just natural wisdom, James. I believe I used your shoelace or something.
No, you used my dog lead, but yes.
Your dog lead. I'm not a fan of the bulky ones, but, something small that goes around your wrist, no objection to that.
But that was all right. There's no harm there because you were standing in a couple of perilous positions, but that was more of a wrist strap than a camera strap. But it's a similar principle, but you put it on for a specific reason, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
But generally speaking, our conclusion is there is no point to having a camera strap on your camera unless there's a point.
All right, well, if you guys have got an opinion one way or the other, again, feel free to pop it on the socials and let us know what you think. We'll do a few more comments, I reckon, next month. But we're going to move on to our final feature of the show.
Does the world really need this?
Right, well, we've decided that the world doesn't need camera straps in general, but this is something similar. This is called a cotton carrier. Marcus, you found this. What is it?
Well, this is closely related to what we've just been discussing about camera straps. So I can see James in one of these, actually. They look like a...
I'd look good, wouldn't I, over my little fat belly?
Yeah, they look like a kind of like a bulletproof vest. And the camera then straps or clicks in to this vest so that as you walk along, everybody can see what camera you've got, which is obviously very, very important. Personally, I would never use one of these. If I ever saw anybody else using one of them, I would tell them that they're probably wasting their time. But Ruth's shaking her head, so you clearly disagree.
Well, I have seen people use them, and these are people who are perhaps, Marcus, not as young and agile and fit as you, and they actually really, really appreciate them because of the weight of the cameras. They're not cotton ones, I don't think, but I've seen people wear them with a brace, and they've clipped them on, and they've just said it makes life so much easier. It centres the weight there. They can have their hands free to help them move around. Generally, slightly older people, but they've got a genuine appreciation for that, how that actually helps them with their photography.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a wedding photographer and you've got 3 camera bodies with 3 different lenses on, and you need to go to them all the time, I can kind of see the point in it. But for the kind of photography that we do, which is predominantly landscape photography on our workshops, or wildlife, or even street photography, then I just don't see the point in having one of these. And it slaps of I need another accessory. What do I possibly buy? Oh, look, this will do the trick. A camera bag, like the one we're giving away today, is far more useful than any strap or vest that you're going to find on the market. So keep your camera in your bag where it's going to be safe. You're not going to drop it. If you've got the camera attached to the front of your body and you're climbing over a gate or a fence, or you're scrambling over rocks, that's putting your camera in a very vulnerable position. Whereas if it's tucked away in a bag on your back, nothing can really happen to it there. So I really don't see the point. James, would you ever use one of these?
I wouldn't, mainly because I wouldn't trust the clips anyway. That's the point. And the only reason to use a strap or a harness or whatever, some form as we were just discussing, is to be super safe if you need to have your hands free. So the best thing is put it in a bag. But looking at this one, it's a nice website. What's it called? cottoncarrier.fr. It's made by the French, so it's bound to break down anyway.
Or they'll go on strike and there'll be a long wait list for one.
It's probably, you can probably find it under a huge pile of manure in central Paris.
Right, moving on. In these guys' opinion, Marcus and James, they wouldn't use them. I know people that do use them and appreciate them. But anyway, next thing, does the world really need this? James, going to go to you for this. This is not a camera carrier, although you would want to keep this extraordinarily safe. What is it?
I presume you're alluding to the Leica.
I am, yes. The SL3.
The SL3. And how much is the SL3 SL3, Ruth? Do we know?
I have no idea. I can tell you, it's got 60 megapixels. It's got triple resolution technology. It's resistant to splashes and dust. It's got 3 buttons on the back only, and it has something that I have no idea what it is. 5-axis IS. I mean, is that a thing?
Well, first of all, it's £6,000 for the body, so it's a good job. It's what did you say? It's dust resistant.
It's dust resistant.
So dust resistant for £6,000. Now, it is a kind of simplified version. In terms of what the axes are, we'll cross over to our axes expert, Marcus, and he can tell us what the 5 axes this camera has and how that works, because as far as I'm aware, it's not possible to have that.
Well, okay, so yeah, you can only have 3 axes. So you've got basically, four.
This one's got 5.
No, you can't have 5.
It says on the internet.
I know it says it, but there are only 3 axes in a 3-dimensional world. There are only 3 axes, unless Leica have reinvented the 3-dimensional world.
Yes, exactly. So they've gone down a black hole with this. But having said all of that, it does look. The one thing that I do like about it, apart from it looks good, which, I mean, is marginally irrelevant. I don't think I've ever bought a camera equipment because it looks good anyway. But it does nonetheless look good. It's gone back to that traditional sort of big, where the prism would have been in an original Leica, that big lump on top. So, it looks like a traditional Leica. It's nice and simple. They've stripped off a load of buttons, which they talk about stripping off buttons in technology, which just basically means they've probably hidden it in a menu. But anyway, nonetheless, I'd quite like to have a go with one, to be honest with you. Does the world need it? Yet to find out. If it's invented 2 more axes, definitely.
Yes. Yeah, the 3-button thing intrigues me because one of my kind of main gripes about some cameras that I've used is that they've just got too many buttons on.
Yeah, but you say that, but the problem is we know that all they've done is put that what would have been on a button in a menu. That's the problem.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But I was just about to say you can go the other way and have too few buttons. It really depends on, what you want access to quickly. But if you can set it up and program it so that those 3 buttons are the 3 buttons that you want. I mean, I remember when the Canon R6 and the R5 came out, suddenly there was a dial to do the ISO, which in all previous cameras was a button, and then you had to move the wheel that normally did the aperture or the exposure time, and having those 3 controls just made everything so much simpler.
It makes you wonder why, when they first brought out digital cameras, they never had 3 controls for the 3 different principal elements of the triangle. But there you go. But nonetheless, it is worth, if nothing else, Google Leica SL3 and have a look at it, because it's a damn fine looking thing.
A bit like yourself,
Marcus. Is it worth it? Does the world need it?
I don't think the world really needs it, but I mean, I'd love to have one in my bag, but I don't have £6,000 to have that privilege, I'm afraid.
I tell you what, I would do with that £6,000. I'd buy an old Hasselblad rather than a new Leica. That's what I would do.
What, and then with the £5,000 change, go and have a good night out.
No,
to a laser show with your camera.
No, I can't answer that the way I was going to answer it.
All right, well, let's move on, because this next product does not cost £6,000. Might be a bit more affordable, Marcus, for you. It's a ThinkTank pink. I can't say it. ThinkTank.
Would you like some help, Ruth?
Pixel Pocket Rocket.
I've used one of these for a long time. Pixel Pocket Rocket.
No, I actually 2 weeks ago bought not this exact one, but a ThinkTank version of, well, I don't know, it's a slightly different version, an older version, I think, just because I was going away somewhere and was fed up with using my big, clunky, heavy memory card holder. Came a day after I left, which was a bit annoying. But what is this one, Marcus?
Okay, so this is just the version 2 of the one that you're probably talking about, because it is the Pixel Pocket Rocket V2. And it's just basically an updated little wallet thing, which can store all your memory cards, and they also do ones for batteries as well. Now, I'm not one for additional accessories. However, I tend to keep my memory cards and other little paraphernalia in one of the zipped pockets on the flap of my bag that opens. And I have had a couple of times recently where I've opened the flap and the zip hasn't been done up and the memory cards have spilled out on the floor. Now, luckily, I've seen that, because if that happens on grass, there's no audible noise to warn you about it. So if you didn't see it happen, you could easily pick up your bag and walk off, and you've left your memory cards sitting on the hillside. Now, that in itself isn't a big deal unless you've got all your images on those memory cards, in which case it's a massive deal. So I can kind of see the use for something like this. And I would imagine that, if you dropped something of that size, it's going to be a lot easier to see on the floor. So there's certainly a use for it. And I don't know what the price in the UK is, but because I don't think they're actually out in the UK yet, but they are out in the States, coming soon to the UK.
You can certainly buy the old ones in the UK anyway, and I'm not entirely sure what the difference between V2, the version 2 and the original, but if you use these correctly, they are brilliant because they're basically a third backup. So without getting too complicated as to what size memory cards one should and shouldn't use, but I use these all the time, and I use them as a way of backing up. So you shoot a card, once that card is full, you put it back in the wallet backwards, as it were, upside down and backwards, which means it's waiting to be processed. And then you work those down, and even once you've processed the images, and you've got them onto your computer, basically, put the card back in the wallet in the bottom slot. And then if you've got a wallet full of cards, they work their way to the top. So basically, if you've got a load of, 512 or gigabytes or 256 or smaller, you've got enough memory in there to have a backup for a very, very long time, no matter what system you're shooting. And it's saved my bacon on a number of occasions. And when we're away shooting commercial stuff, Marcus and I, are abroad somewhere doing, a job that has a lot of data, it acts as a third backup system, as well as it being on a computer and on a spare memory card, hard drive, sorry. So of all of, Marcus mentioned earlier, of all of the gadgets that you can buy to clip onto your camera bag, this one, and they do one for batteries as well, which again, once your battery's been spent, as it were, just put it in backwards, and it needs recharging. It just keeps life really simple. So of all those things, these two are the ones that I would recommend the most. As for what the V2 is, I'm not entirely sure, but the V1 was pretty darn good. So
the Pixel Pocket Rocket. The world needs it? Yes, I reckon so. Sigma 50mm 1.2. This is, again, going up the other end of the price range, but this is a brand new camera lens. F1.2. There's been a lot of talk about this in the news recently, in photography news world. Have either of you guys had a chance to actually handle one, or have you seen one yet?
I haven't handled one. I've seen one online. But the good thing about this is that Sigma historically have not seem to have made lenses with weight necessarily at the top of the agenda. So I've got a lot of Sigma lenses, and while they're very, very good lenses, optically excellent, if you were going to criticize them in any way, shape or form, it would be down to the weight. And I think what it's come down to is a lot of them were over-engineered, which isn't a bad thing in many respects. But if you're looking at keeping your camera gear as lightweight as possible, then a bag full of Sigma lenses.
To be fair, you've been talking about you're talking about the art series of lenses, and to be fair to Sigma, they weren't necessarily designed for the sort of photography that you use them for.
No, absolutely. But this is an art lens, so but what they've done here is they seem to have bumped the weight issue a little bit higher up the agenda, and this new 50mm f1.2 only comes in at 745 grams, so they're actually marketing this as a lightweight lens, and this replaces, or it's an addition to, the existing 50mm 1.4, and I think this one is very much slightly lighter than the f1.4, so you've gained an extra third of a stop of light, which is good for a couple of reasons, but we've also made it lighter as well, and they've done that by slightly probably under-engineering what was an over-engineered lens. So let's talk about the difference between f1.4 and f1.2, James, because it's only a third of a stop, so it's not a big deal.
The main difference is that where you can actually use it. So for an f1.4, I mean, as we've discussed, Sigma art lenses are pretty darn good, even at the widest of apertures, from corner to corner. They're all brilliant, absolutely nigh on perfect, or in fact too sharp in the middle, but that's another debate. But from corner to corner, they're pretty good, all of their art lenses across the range. Now, at 1.4 on the old 50, you would have got a little bit of drop off in the corners at 1.4. Now, but this 1.2, it means that at 1.4, you won't get any drop off, basically, because you're not over revving the engine. You're not using it at its full capacity. And one of the common mistakes people make is that they think, right, shallow depth of field, I'll just go to the widest possible aperture my lens will do for, I don't know, a portrait or whatever it is, something that they require a shallow depth of field for. So they'll instantly open the lens wide open. That's not necessarily what you should do. So, and funnily enough, I'm just looking at a competitor of ours, a guy called Dustin Abbott, who's done a very good review on it. And he's actually talking, in fact, he's got the lens set at 1.4 for where he's testing it and says it's absolutely spot on. So, not using a lens at its widest possible aperture is great. And what this lens means is that you can now use it at 1.4 and it's going to be fantastic from corner to corner. If you do use it at 1.2, be very aware of how shallow a depth of field you're going to get on this, especially if you're doing portraiture or something like that. You will literally, especially if you've got a big old nose like mine, if you miss focus on the front of my nose with this lens, my eyes are going to be a long, long way out of focus.
So, talking of the very shallow depth of field there, James, is that at f1.2, you do get a beautiful bokeh in the background, even more so than you would at f1.4. So in this lens, Sigma have got 13 aperture blades, and they're rounded so that this ensures that whatever aperture you're at, the aperture hole is perfectly oval rather than jagged edges. And what that does is it makes the outer focus areas nice and smooth and buttery. So if you're after that shallow depth of field, which, like James says, is usually used for things like portraiture, then this will make the outer focus areas look very lush and
just be very. I can't wait to actually try it and see how it works and compare it. But the other thing is that if just be careful if you go and buy one of these using it at 1.2, because as I said, that depth of field, that what appears to be sharp and unsharp is going to be, the fall off will be huge, especially if you're close to your subject clearly. So currently only available in the Sony E mount and the L mount series of lenses, where L mount is for Leica, Panasonic, and also Sigma. Price is $1,299 in the UK or $1,399 US. What's happened to our pound, by the way? That's another whole debate. How can that be virtually the same price, dollar versus pound, barring, honestly, it's a scandal.
All right, well, something that's not actually got a price on it yet, in fact, not even in production yet, is something that Three-Legged Thing are doing a Kickstarter for. Marcus, what's this?
Well, it's a long Arca Swiss style quick release plate, and it just begs the question, why are they doing a Kickstarter on this? I mean, it's just a piece of metal. Just make it. When you say long, what are you talking? They're normally like an inch or so. The longest one, I think, is 30 centimetres, so it's 12 inches, so it's a foot long. But there are other versions. I think there's a 9-inch version, a 6-inch version.
Maybe you get your Subway. When you buy a Subway when you're in America, and you just balance it on top of your tripod. Maybe it's specifically designed for that.
Yeah. So you're probably thinking, okay, so what would be the use of a long quick release plate? Well, you can attach other accessories to it. So you could attach, another camera, for example, or your Subway, or a flash, or anything like that. So that's the purpose of it. Or you can turn it 90 degrees so that it's facing forwards, and you can use it as a macro kind of, sliding scale. So you can focus your camera with a macro lens, put it to the closest focusing distance, and then just adjust the distance with the camera to the subject until it comes into sharp focus. I mean, does the world really need it? No.
Well, it's called an ultra plate, and it's transformative. Not sure why it's transformative, but it's functional, versatile, and frankly, sexy. That's what it says on the Kickstarter website. So, hey, sounds like me. Transformative, functional, versatile, and frankly, sexy.
Yeah, if it's got ultra and sexy in the title, I'm in.
There you go. It is worth noting that you can buy them anyway. And there is one other use for them, which I do use ultra long plates for, and that is if you are trying to balance a long telephoto lens on a gimbal head. You wouldn't necessarily need a 300mm one, but anyway, and you're putting on and off teleconverters, then it throws the pivot point, the point of balance, out slightly. So you need a long plate on the bottom of a lens like that to achieve perfect balance sometimes. So there is a point to it, but why Three-Legged Thing are doing this version, I've no idea.
And as a Kickstarter.
Yeah, no, I don't understand that. I genuinely don't understand that. But anyway, it comes in burnt orange, so I want 2.
Anyway, we're going to put links to all of these things, all these gear items and the news stories as well in the show notes, as well as the competition link. Don't forget the ThinkTank competition link. It's going to be up there for a couple of weeks. So coming up next month on our main YouTube show on Photography Online, we're going to be day 4 in our National Parks Challenge. Looking at long exposures as well. We are also going to be hopefully at the eclipse in the US of A. We haven't actually filmed this yet, but we are planning to do a feature of it. So as long as the clouds don't come over, there will be a feature there in next month's show. So that'll be super interesting. And then we're going to be doing part 2 of 2 in Analogue Affairs of Mastering Metering, first of which was on this month. So that's all coming up on the 5th of May. But we're going to leave it there, I think, for this month's podcast. Marcus and James, thanks so much for being here. We've got another couple. I don't know who's in next month. Do we know who's in yet?
It won't be me because I'm off to photograph the eclipse.
Is it me? Do I get to come back? Am I invited back, Ruth?
Possibly. Yourself and Harry or James, whoever will cause the least or possibly the most.
I'm James.
Sorry. Yourself and Harry or Nick. Sorry, Nick, we love you. Anyway, it's going to be good again next month, of course. So big thank you again to ThinkTank for sponsoring this month's podcast. Until next time, take good care, but most of all, take good photos.
The Photography Online Podcast.